Chairman. My name is John McClaughry. I am Vice President of the Ethan Allen Institute, and I might say it, a veteran of this committee in years past, somewhere back in the Paleolithic era. Let me tell you a little war story first about resolutions. Back in 1971, President Nixon was engaged in a diplomatic effort to improve the lot of Jews in the Soviet Union. And as a part of that effort, his people got the idea of getting the Republicans in all the states to get resolutions passed through their legislatures to cheer the president's efforts in this regard. The Republican Party gave it to the Republican Speaker here in this building. He gave it to one of the members to promote, and got on the floor, and clearly most of the members had very little idea of what this was all about. And I recall speaking against it on the grounds that we were being made a pawn of, in this case, the Republican president, who I voted for, somewhat to my regret later on. And the House voted it down, much to send it back to committee, on the simple reason that the House did not want to be a pawn in some greater campaign unrelated to our responsibilities to the people of Vermont. And I had a little bit of a flashback to that as I was sitting here this morning, because this resolution is clearly in the same vein. It is part of a national campaign to grab the pro-science issue, as the advocates would call it, and get a resolution passed here to put the skeptics on the defensive. I'm interested to know that here's what the resolution says in the first part. According to the most credible body of climate experts in the world, the IPCC, the warming in the climate system is unequivocal, and human influence on the climate system is clear. That sort of rang a bell. I went back and found this full-page V-Purge advertisement in the Caledonian Record, November 23rd, 2013, which says, according to the most credible body of climate experts in the world, the IPCC, the scientific evidence for warming of the climate system is unequivocal. Yes, it's pretty clear to me that what's going on here is that you're being asked to pass a resolution that has no real-world consequences, but it has political consequences for the advocates. Now, you have in this and other committees issues like the production tax credit for wind towers, the feed-in tariff for renewable energy. These are real-world consequences. Money is made and lost on the decisions that legislatures make on this kind of issue. That is not true of this resolution. This is just a sense of the Senate, and I would be very surprised if it didn't emerge relatively intact from this committee, and will not be heard from again, except possibly in fundraising letters from the sponsoring organizations. I'm not an atmospheric scientist, but I do have an honors degree in physics and a graduate degree in engineering, and I followed this issue for 25 years, which arose back when I was on this committee. I followed it very carefully, and I'd like to speak to you just a little bit from that perspective, bearing in mind that this is a vast subject, as both of the former speakers have made very clear in their very able testimony. Taking the resolution language, I've deleted a whole bunch of points I was going to make because of the time limitations, but I would just offer this for your consideration. Describing the IPCC as the most credible body of climate experts in the world is really, to me, laughable. This organization, created by governments, managed by governments, had 25 years of scandals, contradictions, political manipulation, suppression of evidence, attack on critics that make it anything but credible. The resolution goes on to say warming in the climate system is unequivocal. That's absolutely true. It is unequivocal. And there's not anyone that I know that challenges that at all. The good thing about warming is that it offers a metric. You can test warming. What's the temperature? You have different ways of measuring that temperature, but climate change has no metric. It just has a bunch of gauzy suppositions about whether the ice went out in Stiles Pond at an earlier date here in St. Johnsbury, Vermont. Warming, however, has been measured since 1979 by the microwave satellite systems at University of Alabama, Huntsville, run by NASA, and by the RSS system out in Palo Alto, California, which results largely agree with each other, and it's undoubtedly clear that this planet has warmed since 1978. It's warmed since 1850, when the Little Ice Age gave way to the modern period. It's warmed since 12,000 BC, when the glaciers receded and the sea levels once again rose. It all depends on which endpoints you take for your period of that you're describing. One endpoint, of course, is today, and where you pick the other one gets you a different shape on the curve. The human influence on the climate system is clear, says the resolution. Well, actually, it's not nearly so clear. I won't go through the different reasons why that statement is hotly debated, except to say that in the early days of the 1990s, the advocates said there will be a HEW, anthropogenic global warming fingerprint, high in the atmosphere over the equator, called the tropical hotspot. Their computers predicted this, the satellites went there, and the radiosonde balloons went there, and there wasn't any hotspot. So what does that tell you? It tells you the modeling didn't work. My first job out of graduate school was modeling nuclear reactor cores for General Electric. I was a junior member of the team, admittedly, but I had some experience with how you deal with modeling. And if modeling doesn't match the planet, or in my case, didn't match what went on inside the reactor, there's not something wrong with the reactor, there's something wrong with the model. And what we've done here is come up with a global circulation model, quite a few of them, which simply failed to reproduce the known temperature record, and they failed completely to predict the 18-year pause, as it's now called, in global temperatures. So there's something wrong with those models. There are some other models that have done better, but the IPCC does not recognize any model that does not show warming. The resolution recites Act 168 of 2006, the state's global emissions goals. At the time that passed, I was pretty outspoken in saying we're never going to meet that goal. That goal was 25% below the 1990 emissions level by 2012. That was 6 years away at that time. You forget it. It's not going to happen. Of course, it didn't happen. And the resolution explains that it didn't happen and recites a commitment to trying to some new way to make it happen. Further on, we have in the extreme storm business, which is highly controversial. The resolution says that some unnamed scientists somewhere say that Tropical Storm Irene is a harbinger of things to come. I mean, really, you've got to do better than that to justify a resolution. Incidentally, the IPCC AR5, the most recent reports, addresses the extreme storms issue and decides it has low confidence in those projections. I won't go through any more of the rest of the resolution, but my point here is that if you're going to put up a resolution that has no real world consequences, but merely expresses opinions in a political theater, then at least you ought to tighten this up a little bit and try to see if you can eliminate some of those weak spots. Personally, I think that the former speakers have made some good points. Climate is changing. That will have effects. There will be need to adapt to the climate. The sea level, according to the NOAA satellite, the NOAA ecosystem, ECHO, I believe it is, predicts a 9-inch rise in sea level by 2100. Well, 9 inches doesn't sound a lot to us here in Vermont, but of course in Bangladesh could be a problem, and we have to deal, the world, and various governments have to deal with that. But ask yourself this question about whether the influence is clear. If the world reduced its carbon dioxide emissions by 50% tomorrow, wham! What effect on global temperature by the year 2100? Any detectable effect? Ask that of the advocates. because that is, of course, one of the key questions. And that relates back to whether the climate sensitivity number is 1.5 to 4.5 degrees centigrade by 2100 as a result of doubling the carbon dioxide concentration, or whether it's a much lower number. If it's a much lower number, like 1 degree centigrade by 2100, nobody's going to get very excited about it. They aren't going to pass bills subsidizing renewable energy. They aren't going to create feed-in tariffs. And the people who want to see all those things happen are going to be sorely disappointed. And that's really where the crux of this debate is. There's money to be made. GE, my former employer, has been in the forefront of conniving ways to work the climate change concern for corporate profit. And I don't blame a company for seeking profits. Far be it from that. But when the government creates what I consider to be a vast overstatement of a problem, and companies then try to make money out of that misconception, I think that creates a bit of an ethical problem. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to read what I said in 2007. I would say it's slightly different today, but this is what I said after due consideration back then. Planet Earth warms and cools in many cycles, influenced by variations in the Earth's orbit, the tilting and precession of the axis, solar irradiance, cosmic ray flux, solar magnetic fluctuations, oceanic decadal oscillations, cloud cover variations, and terrestrial emissions of water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, volcanic ash, and other gases. From 1850 to 1940, long before anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions became significant, the planet warmed significantly as it emerged from the Little Ice Age. Again, since 1977, Earth has experienced a slight global warming trend in the lower troposphere, where the greenhouse gas effect is greatest. There is no scientific evidence for detectable anthropogenic global climate forcing that produces these recurring effects, and there is little or no prospect that human intervention, even at enormous economic and social cost, can detectably alter the result of these natural processes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. McClaughry. It's good that, happy that you were speaking this morning, because I knew that you would probably not be cowed by the fact that you were going to say something that might not be comport with the sense of the resolution. So honestly, thank you for your frankness. I guess without, and I appreciate the notion that the resolution should be well constructed, well edited, and supportable. The question I have is just around stepping away from the resolution itself a little bit. Do you feel that there's a proper role for state government in stewardship? And I think that's in part what is behind the resolution, is acknowledging a stewardship obligation and then following up on that obligation by putting forward programs that tend to meet that obligation.
Stewardship is a broad topic, and I'm proud to say I'm probably one of the few survivors, along with Bill Doyle, who voted for Act 250 in 1969-70. So yes, I've always been, in my mind, an environmentalist, but I've also had resistance to ideas which are further developed and seem to me to be exaggerated beyond the bounds of ethical practice. And I think that's the case here with the current climate change craze. If we knew that carbon dioxide emissions from Vermont made a detectable, from the United States, from the Western world, if you will, made a detectable contribution to predictable climate change over the years, then yes, I think government should act to reduce that, and I happen to be particularly interested in getting rid of coal. Coal is the big villain here. And coal is cheap, it's easy to get. Half of our energy comes from coal or more. Clearly, what puzzles me is that the obvious answer to maintaining a modern electrified society without coal is nuclear. But what baffles me is the people who denounce coal as a carbon dioxide emitter, are also completely opposed to nuclear energy, which even James Hansen, the father of the global climate change movement, has forcefully said is mankind's only answer to maintain civilization without and getting rid of fossil fuel emissions.
Well, thank you again for coming in.
Any other questions?
Yeah. One question, we're getting a little behind.
Okay, that's going to be tough. Well, let me just mention one thing. The unnamed scientist, I believe, that you referenced is in the room. I believe the research we put in here is it correct? I do want to go back to the advocates piece, though, for just a moment. You know, well, that we talk to a lot of folks in this building, whether it be students who are environmentalists, advocates who are environmentalists, all sorts of folks depending on the issue. And since you brought it up, I do want to focus it a little bit back on you and your organization, because you too also talk to advocates, and there are advocates that reach out to you. And I can't help but, when you mentioned it, looking back on some information that I read recently, your organization is funded through the Koch brothers as an affiliate of another organization. And so I'm just wondering if you feel as though we cannot have these conversations with different advocates and listen to them and sort of either agree or disagree with their positions. But basically organizations like yourself, because I could be wrong, but I believe there's something, the State Policy Network, I think is what it's called, that you guys are connected to. So I think it's, I feel obligated to sort of, again, you are representing a certain group,
Yes.
a certain advocacy group based on funding that you receive, ideas that you receive, those kinds of things.
First, I hope you'll ask that of the other speakers to come behind me.
Well, they didn't bring it up.
Well, you brought it up. So
You brought it up.
with me, so I'm going to bring it up. We have never gotten, we had a $50,000 grant to finance a succession to get rid of me as president, at my instigation, I might say, 6 years ago from the Cato Institute. Cato Institute has two of the Koch brothers on their governing board at the time. It's changed since. I was never aware that we got any money at all from the Koch brothers or the Koch Foundation or the Koch Industries or anything like that. And I've never had a communication from any of those people urging our organization to fight against the climate change advocates. Never. This came up because I'm interested in this. Does that answer your question?
Well, I guess, all right, let me just, here's my question. Is it true or not true that the Ethan Allen Institute is affiliated with the State Policy Network, which is, again, receives funding from the Koch brothers?
Well,
And I'm looking for the article.
Last I heard, there were 56 state free market think tanks.
Yes or no, I just like to know.
For whom the Trade Association is a state policy network, but they don't fund us. And I don't know whether U.S. Public Interest Research Group funds BPERS or not. They can answer that question. And if they do, it's okay with me.
So no funding.
No.
Receive no funding whatsoever.
Not on climate change issues. We've got some small foundation grants and other issues, the most important of which was the Off the Rails project.
So yes, Koch brother money, yes. Related to whatever.
Well, I don't, like I said before, we've never gotten any money from the Koch brothers, the Koch Foundation, the Koch Industries, but money floats around in the political world, as you know, and as the people from BPERS know. And whether some of those dollar bills were touched by Charlie Koch somewhere along the line, I don't know. But I've never had any communication with any of those people. I've never written, asked for money, or received money in those channels. And finally, so what? I'm here presenting my own views and trying to make this on reasonable good science. And I'm not taking instructions from anybody. I'm making the stand on its own merits.
And I think, I can't speak for the committee, but I believe we too are looking at good science and here because of our beliefs in what, at least thinking for myself, I believe that we have a serious issue on our hands. And that needs to be addressed. And that I know sometimes folks feel as though things cannot come out of resolutions, but I'll tell you right now, there is a middle schooler that reads an article based on today's testimony that says, gosh, the state senate in Vermont is taking this seriously and does believe, based on scientific evidence, that humans have indeed played a major role in creating climate issues. And I think we'll actually have a positive outcome for the rest of the year.
One last question, Senator McDonald.
Thank you for coming today and your political view of things. Properly located renewables can lower Vermonters' electric bills. Net metering projects lower Vermonters' contributions to funding the New England grid build out. And efficiency Vermont produces electricity at 3.7 cents a kilowatt hour. Why does our resolution, why do you believe our resolution focuses on global warming instead of reducing Vermonters' electric bills, which that would happen through these projects would have the same result for the world's climate?
I have a hard time seeing how forcing the utilities to buy renewable power from wind and solar at 3 and 4 times the grid rate reduces Vermont's electric bills. Conservation and efficiency will reduce electric bills, and I'm all for that. I put solar panels on my barn in 1970, they'd say. It didn't work. However, I got them on Mother Earth News. it was a flop. Yeah, they're one of the useful things we can do to conserve it. There's no point wasting energy. And the question is, how much do you have to pay to prevent wasting energy? And if insulation is cheap and tightening up your house is practical, by all means you get a quick payback. My problem with this, Senator, is that we've rigged a deal where the wind and solar people are making the ratepayers pay 3 and 4 times the going rate for power, which is making somebody a lot of money. And that bothers me. If you want to raise the rates you can make the economic argument, if we make electricity expensive, people will stop using so much of it. And I've heard that argument made, and it's clearly true. It's the same way you're taxing cigarettes. We think it'll suppress cigarette consumption. But I'm not at all happy with the way we've made the Public Service Board into a 4th branch of government to shift costs around in a way that the ordinary ratepayer and taxpayer can't understand, that benefits certain private parties who are doing very well. Thank you.
Thank you for your, appreciate that. I think the public doesn't always understand when rates are being, bills are being lowered and when they aren't. And that's our responsibility.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Can we pass